In my mother's womb, I once resided, a simple world where love presided. But after birth, I felt the sting, ventured out to face what life would bring. Oh, what I know, it fills me up. An everlasting vessel, never to corrupt. My beliefs are steadfast, they won't rearrange. They comfort me through every dark exchange. A mother's care, an egg she had for me. I learned the ties of production, you see. She always provided selflessly. Where innocence was lost, I finally broke free. Stability within my mind. Seeking those who are of my kind. Charity now fills my heart. To aid the poor in lands apart. Good deeds, oh how they swell. A small prize, a story to tell. The history of the world unfolds. A journey through the ages, untold. Oh, what I know, it fills me up. An everlasting vessel, never to corrupt. My beliefs are steadfast, they won't rearrange. They comfort me through every dark exchange. Life's tapestry is woven, the past we can't sever. In my mother's womb, I'll forget you never. For there, in the beginning, the seeds were sown. And in this song, my story is known.
I was hollow inside, but I couldn't find out what the reason was. I was hollow inside, but I couldn't find out what the reason was when I was hollow inside. Hollow inside, hollow inside, hollow inside, hollow inside, hollow inside, hollow inside, hollow inside. Return the gift. Radio tipping point. I think we've gone through a period when too many children and people have been given to understand, I have a problem. It's the government's job to cope with it. Or I have a problem, I will go and get a grant to cope with it. I am homeless, the government must house me. And so they are casting the problems of society. And who is society? There is no such thing. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people, and people look at themselves first. Dear Margaret Thatcher. And that's a great place to start the show today. Our title again is Return the Gift, Radio Tipping Point. Mike Ward. And within this Anthropocene that we have created, we have come to the conclusion this all belongs to us. Yes, it all belongs to us. Not to anybody else, only to us. And the fact is that we didn't create any of this. Oh yes, we believe that we are the masters of our own destiny. We believe that we are the ones that are in control. In spite of all the shenanigans we've seen this summer. And it didn't start this summer. We all know that. And so I started thinking about, so where does it start? And in what form did it start? And to what degree was that inception some sort of transaction, as we have come to know and love the way that we react to each other? And it doesn't matter which part of the world, it doesn't matter which religion we're looking at. We go back to the inception of the universe. And contrary to popular belief, we were not part of that. No, and we were not even here on this planet at the time the universe came to be. But we were given everything we need. With nothing really expected in return, which can be considered a definition of this term, gift. So we started with the universe as a gift. Let me give you an example. So a tree will grow until it's reached its capacity. And yes, us human beings, we work the same way. We do not grow without bounds. So that tree continues growing by giving life in the form of seeds. That sounds very familiar. Don't we do that way as well as part of being the human race? That we reach a point which we call adulthood, and at that point in time we look at being progenitors. And within all elements to be found on this planet, and very possibly beyond, but that is far from my capacity of knowing. Maybe some of you might be a little bit better off when it comes to that, but certainly I choose not to venture down that road. But we understand that all of nature, including humanity, fits in line with the concept of survival and reproduction. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If we can't survive, then we become extinct. And we know plenty of examples of where we were doing a pretty good job with those self-inflicting wounds. But survival alone isn't enough. No. We need to be able to procreate, just like nature, like the rest of nature. And these are our drivers. And I'm not coming up with anything new. No, there's nothing new here. But this idea seems to have become quite estranged in the way that we look at things based upon our transactional nature, better said. But in reality, things don't work that way. The universe gave us the gifts to survive without expecting anything in return. So what we have done is we have accepted these gifts and we have killed the flow. Yes, we have killed the flow. Because we do not pass those gifts on. We consider those things to belong to us and solely to us. And with that, we stop what would be considered a very natural process. And we've been able to get away with it for a very long time simply because there was not enough of us, because we kept working on that extinction part, figuring out ways to eliminate ourselves from this planet. And not that we still don't try that one, of course. But we figure out ways to hold on to whatever it may be, and then the flow stops. I believe that the gift paradigm is present everywhere in our lives. Though we have become used to not seeing it, exchange, with its requirement for measurement, is much more visible. However, even our greeting, "How are you?" is a way of asking, "What are your needs?" Communication is giving gifts, from the Latin unus, which implies gift. It is how we form the community. So you could see in the origins of these words that these concepts are very much embedded in our society. Just because we don't acknowledge it doesn't mean they don't exist. And in fact, if we look at the ability to give gifts as being one of the most natural things in the world, then that means that we believe by giving in a non-transactional way. In other words, we give something and we don't expect something in return. In, say, for example, in comparison to what we would call an exchange. So I give something to you and I immediately expect something in return. Gift giving doesn't work that way. Because the concept of gift is, as I mentioned earlier, the idea to keep the flow alive. Perhaps if I can give you an example, I will give you a present. I will not expect something in return. You, in turn, will have something else that you will pass on. Then let's assume that the present that I gave you was something that you needed to sustain your existence. And because I gave you this present that allowed you to thrive, you were able to create something else that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So you've created something new. You are part of this flow. You are totally in line with this way of thinking that by giving without expecting something in return, that through that we create the ecosystem which fosters our own substance. And so you've taken my gift, you've created something else, you've passed it on to somebody else. They in turn continue with that flow. And if we believe all of this is to be in some circle, obviously a number of circles, that allow for whatever our needs might be tied to subsistence in our will to survive. That when I need whatever it may be, it is to be found within that ecosystem. Because let's be honest, we do not know what it could be, what we would need. We don't know in which form it should appear. And we don't know who can actually supply it to us. So we have to be completely open. So is substance only food and water and air? Or could it take on different forms? Can gratitude be a gift? The simple acknowledgement that we are appreciative that you were there. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty good definition of gratitude. Because you pass on this profession, and the actual return that you get as an individual is the ability to share those thoughts with somebody else. What about ideas? Can ideas be gifts? I would say most definitely. The ability to share whatever thoughts you may have without fear that somebody will claim them for their own. And for some reason, this one seems to be very difficult for us, because we are deathly afraid that our ideas have so much value and that we're missing the opportunity of fame and fortune. Yes, fame and fortune due to these ideas. Oh, and I can think of so many examples. Where I'll be holding a conversation with individuals, and they spend the whole time taking notes. And every once in a while they will take their nose out of that piece of paper, look at you, and nod their head in approval. And then they'll go back to that piece of paper and start scribbling again, because they're so afraid that they might miss something that you're saying where they think it's going to change their lives. And you could say that that is one sad state of affairs, but I'm afraid to say that what I just described to you hasn't been all that uncommon. No, it hasn't. And I guess I could have gotten upset. Although I think today I've gotten to the point of where I'm not really interested in dealing with people who are not capable of giving freely. And of course, part of the problem is giving others a chance, because maybe they are giving freely, but you can't recognize it. And for me personally, I think that's one of my challenges, where I keep going back and forth, trying to make the call, and understanding that for the most part, with a few exceptions, but very few, that people have this behavior not with the intention of being malicious, but perhaps this has become part of their routine. Maybe it's part of their defense mechanism. Something must have happened where they realize that if they are not able to do that, or they've convinced themselves, it's not a realization, it's a justification, that if they don't take on this attitude, that they are very vulnerable. And the worst thing in the world for these people is to be vulnerable. So they figured the best defense is a good offense. So they'll take whoever's ideas that they can come up with, not understanding that the ideas alone are not enough. Now let's break this one down. The ideas don't come on their own. The ideas are developed based upon some previous experience that only we as individuals could have, right? We had the experience that led us to these ideas. So that means that person who has been spending the whole time scribbling down all this information, they could not understand all of those experiences that you had to come up with the idea to begin with. So that would be part number one. Part number two would be the execution. Because you understand the idea in a certain way, that the actual execution of that idea can only be followed in the way that you perceive it. And of course, execution does not equate to success. And understanding we are not a collection, in contradiction to good old Maggie, what she said about society. Let's go back to that quote, if I can come up with it again. That there are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people, and people look to themselves first. And the worst part is that she actually believed it. No, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that we listened, and her and some others did a damn good job in convincing us that that was true. So let's go back to point number two. So we have an idea, then we want to execute it. And of course, the execution is going to be based upon our experiences during the execution. and for things to work properly, then they have to be part of that flow that I described, right? So we give freely, we give to each other, not knowing what the others are going to do with it. But if we live in an environment where everyone is freely cooperating because they understand that this is really the only option, then they have enough faith within the system that it's based on you and me and everybody else that things will work out. And it's based upon this idea of giving freely. So we have our idea, we give freely, people will interpret the idea and bring in their own perspective. And that will allow for us to look at our idea anew. We will not look at the idea the same way, because we will now have the gift of somebody else's perspective. You know, this word gift has a number of meanings in the English language, apart from this idea of present. And although there are numerous interpretations, I make a clear differentiation between a gift and an exchange. Because a gift is something that we give freely without any expectations that we get anything in return. And so we've passed this idea on. We receive a new perspective that enhances this idea, and now the idea is no longer mine, it's ours. And the more people we can bring into this discussion, the more robust this idea will be, because we will have all the other perspectives of the people that we've included in this conversation. And again, if we believe in this ecosystem where we give freely and know that when we have needs, that somebody within this ecosystem will be able to help us. There was a gentleman, I believe in the 70s, could be wrong, could be 80s, makes no difference. It was a long time ago. His name was Mark Granovetter. And Granovetter had all kinds of interesting ideas. The one that is most poignant here for a conversation is the difference between strong and weak ties. And what Granovetter was inferring is that if we have a close group of individuals where we have very strong relationships, that very possibly we might not be able to have our needs covered because that group is small, probably somewhat homogeneous, in fact more than somewhat, probably it would be very homogeneous because it's all part of our identity, it's how we see ourselves, and inevitably within those strong ties that they would be part of our tribe. But what we really need are those weak ties. The weak ties are the ones that are acquaintances that we might meet every once in a while. As is often the case with relationships, sometimes they're a little bit closer, perhaps not so close. And again, within this framework of flow, in the ability to give without expecting something in return, knowing full well that within this construct, when you need it, it's there. Then you have these weak ties that are also giving freely. So let's assume, for simplicity's sake, that I have a need and I am able to make the call to not just the people, the close connections, but those weak links as well, the weak ties. And I could very well imagine somebody within that group, within that network, will go out and say, no, I can't help you, but I know somebody who can. Yeah, I know somebody who can. And with that, you are able to come up with a solution to your dilemma. Is there any danger tied to this viewpoint? Well, we have historical precedents. I'd like to talk about a concept coming from the Native Americans called potlatch. So the pre-commercial form of the circulation of goods, founded on the reciprocity of sumptuary gifts. So they're non-saleable goods, they cannot be sold. But they could be shared freely under the adage that that return gift will take on forms and really only has value when you need it, in comparison to those recent traditions that we have established over the last 100 years, probably less. There are certain times of the year where we are obliged to give presents. And the key word in that sentence is obligation, because we really don't know what to give these people. They may not have any needs, or very often you have not taken the time to understand what their real needs are. Because taking the time that you don't have is perhaps not necessarily always seen as being productive. So we don't take the time, and the clock is ticking, and we're getting close to the 24th of December or this person's birthday or whatever the occasion may be. And we think, oh, we need to buy this person something. We need to buy them something. So that it's another item that we can cross off our list. So then you hand over the quote-unquote present. They pretend to be thrilled. And while they are professing these pseudo-emotions, they're thinking the whole time probably a couple different things. They might think that you have bad taste. They might be thinking the whole time, what am I supposed to do with this? And if they're lucky, they could think of somebody who could actually use whatever it may be. But I tend to think that is the rare case. And either this becomes exchanged or is put away in a closet, or perhaps maybe even thrown away. Let's stay with this idea of the Native Americans. We have a saying in the United States, Indian giver. That means that you give something to somebody and you expect it back. And this is, of course, all tied to this idea that if you receive something, it belongs to you. So it has everything to do with possessions here. This one belongs to you. And because this concept was completely foreign to the Native Americans, they were completely perplexed that the English could have been somebody else. But this idea is, I give you something that belongs to me. And they don't understand that when you hold on to something like that, you destroy the flow. And if we think about life on this planet, and that we're all part of an ecosystem, and what I receive from you will take on completely different form when I pass on something to somebody else. And then, of course, the chain continues. And, of course, this is not something tied completely just to human beings. We're talking about an environment, meaning all living elements within the environment. But once you say that belongs to me, and we kill the flow, well, we know those results, don't we? We know them. That's kind of what has led us to where we are today. With that lack of balance, right? So I talked about gratitude, and I talked about ideas. What other gifts can we pass on to others? When I say others, I'm not just referring to human beings. But this idea of giving, or giving back freely in a form that is beneficial for whoever the recipient may be. It's one that I come back to quite often within the shows. My good friend, Robert Putnam, who wrote a book at the end of the 90s titled Bowling Alone. The concept that Robert Putnam talked about was this idea of social capital. And I believe his idea of social capital very much falls in line with this idea of giving gifts freely, giving gifts because it becomes part of that image that you have of yourself, and knowing full well within this community where all these actions are taking place that returning the gift will take on forms that you cannot imagine. Well, within this idea of social capital, Putnam talks about communities and volunteering primarily. And we reached a point where money came into the equation. And a disturbing phenomena took place once the introduction of money was to be found within these volunteering community constructs. The first one is that it became a transaction. It was no longer, I am giving freely, knowing full well that when I need help, that I can count on the community in some fashion. That part became inadvertently destroyed because that became a transaction and it was anonymous. In other words, I was giving money to some sort of organization. An organization that was only able to exist in its form because of cash flow. So we give money to this organization and we have that warm, fuzzy feeling that, yes, we have done our job. And we don't need to have a guilty conscience about what's going on in our community because we actually gave our fair share. And because time is our most precious commodity, that would mean, although that time that we spent in volunteering, well, we have time for ourselves. So that will mean that we will have more time to binge on a Netflix series or whatever it may be. But how that money is being used and to what degree the needs of those individuals are being taken care of, we have no clue. We have no idea. And we have become desensitized. So that would be the first immediate effect that would come out of that. The second one would be that we have become estranged to each other. So we live in a community, but we don't know each other. And in fact, we find ourselves becoming more and more engrossed in those things that are to be found within our own tribe, whatever that definition may be of what that tribe is. And we built up a wall of anyone who does not belong to that identity. And we've lost the ability to have any type of empathy towards the way that they look at things. Whereas before, if you were volunteering, that would mean that you would be with other people that are volunteering. Very possibly, and I would argue most probably, that identity that we have, it would be tied to that volunteering. And very possibly, and if it was geographically based, most probably, you would end up dealing with some sort of heterogeneous group. that would mean that there would be no such thing as a bubble, certainly not to the same extent. Because you would be dealing with all kinds of people that didn't come from your tribe, right? So that one was gone too. And the third part would be tied to this idea, if I do something, I get something in return. Everything becomes transactional. And with that, social capital, which should be our most prized commodity, is not seen to have any value because we cannot immediately identify whatever those tangible returns may be. Well, let's go on to the next one. Natural capital. Natural capital are those things that we take for granted, that are to be found within nature, that belong to all of us, or they used to belong to all of us, and we've continued to hammer away at that concept, going back to my good friend John Locke in the 17th century, who made the claim that we need private property to foster production. And we will have some cultural differences, but for the most part, we have individuals and corporations who have taken over those things that belong to all of us. And they make the claim that no, that actually belongs to them. And if we want to use them, there is a price tied to it. The third one would be cultural capital. Those things that are unique to our culture. And the best example that I could think of, that an attitude, an artist's expression, would be coming from the Afro-American community, which was co-opted in the 1950s and became what we currently call rock and roll. And then the last one, as I see that my time is slowly ebbing away here, would be spiritual capital. Perhaps that will be the closing for the show today. Spiritual capital, which, they're all important. But I would suspect the spiritual capital is one that we don't think about enough. But this is a topic that I dwell upon quite often within the show. Those elements that make us unique. Those elements that are uniquely you, that are part of your spirit. And the unfortunate part is once we've lost that, once we've lost the spiritual capital, once we've lost that uniqueness, then we try to fill the void in some fashion. Oh, am I back to the binging at Netflix? There's a wonderful author, the book that I'm currently devouring. The book is titled Sacred Economics, and the author is Charles Eisenstein. And he talks about this idea of sensory stimulation that actually acts as a wedge between us and the natural. And looking at the uniqueness, that means that we get to the point of where we're no longer capable. that we forget that we were unique one time. But perhaps maybe our uniqueness actually scares us. And the real problem is that we're not able to relish in the fact that each one of us is unique. Going back to the idea that I pretty much started the show with, in this concept of ideas. And those things that we profess, those things that drive us. If we no longer have them, what do we have? So that would be my food for thought for this week. Thanks for sticking with me till the end here. I will be back next week. That's not a threat. It's a promise. And I wish you all the luck in the world to find that your own uniqueness. Because without that, what do we have?